Howdy folks, welcome to Cowboy Garage. I'm George. Today we're going to talk about tools. I was recently having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he said that he would love to fix up an old truck, but he just can't afford all the special tools that it takes. And I got to thinking about that. And yes, this can be an expensive hobby, but I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people think it is. So we're going to talk about 15 or so tools that you're going to need if you're going to get into this hobby. Now keep in mind, you don't have to have them all on the first day. These are just tools you're going to need to buy along the way. So let me know in the comments if there's any tools that I missed, and let me know if there's any tools that are on my list that you think we could probably do without. So let's get down to it. So you're going to need something to protect yourselves. You're going to need some gloves when you're dealing with chemicals. You're going to need safety glasses, earplugs, some kind of gloves for when you're dealing with hot, sharp, rusty junk, and something to protect your lungs. Now I have these in the full face as well as just the dust mask. Always use a full face when you're using grinders, especially cutoff wheels, because they can explode. And whatever your face is, it's the only one you got, so take care of it. So all of this priced on Amazon, that's about $50-$60. If you got a box of the rubber gloves and whatnot. But so we'll call that a $50 item. The next thing you're going to need is a set of basic hand tools. Something like this. You can go to the big box store or Amazon or whatever and just get a basic mechanic tool set. So what you're looking for is sockets, wrenches, something to turn it with. You don't have to find a Snap-on truck and spend $10,000. Just get something to turn bolts. You also want a screwdriver and maybe even a pry bar or something. But you can get the basic sets like this are usually metric and SAE, but you can get either or depending on whether you're working on a cool old car or just an old car, and I'll let you decide which is which. So, basic hand tools. The next thing you're going to need is a body hammer. Now, body hammers come in all different shapes. You don't have to buy them all. You can start with just one basic body hammer. And while I do really appreciate a good hammer, I also understand economics. And being a bit of a hoarder, I still have my very first body hammer. It's this guy here. It's your basic body hammer. Now, this hammer was about $5 35 years ago. The metal's too soft. The handle is loose in the head. The shape of the face isn't the greatest. It's too flat. It needs to be convex, ideally. But it gets the job done. I did a lot of work on old cars with this hammer before I was able to afford nicer tools. And you can too. So don't make excuses about the price. Go out and find yourself a cheap body hammer and do with it. Yard sales are a great source. Along with the body hammer, you need a dolly. A dolly is just a chunk of metal that you use on the back side while you're working the front side with the hammer. Now, dollies also come in all different shapes. My first dolly was a chunk of metal that I just kind of shaped with a belt sander, I believe. It was so long ago. I don't even know where it is. I think it's still back at my dad's house. But this is a China Mart one. It's hollow on the back side. It's not real great. Martin makes great dollies and body hammers, but this is a cheap one and it will do. Get what you can. The next thing up is sanders. Now, if you're on a budget, you may not have an air compressor. If you don't, that's okay. Get a cheap electric sander. I know these type are basically for woodworking, but you know what? You make do with what you have. And if you can't afford an air compressor, get an electric sander, whatever's in your budget, and get to work. Along with a power sander, you're going to need some hand sanders. Now, you can buy all kinds of fancy hand sanders, but again, there's also the budget option. I have my first sanding board. This guy here, I made it from a 1x4. I dug through my dad's scrap pile, found some wood, ran it through the table saw, glued and screwed it together, and here we are decades later, it still works. Next thing on the list is going to be a drill. Again, drills can be really expensive or they can be really cheap. A drill like that's probably still only 15 or 20 bucks at Harbor Freight. Or you pick one up at a yard sale for $2 or $3. All you need is something to spin a drill bit. If you're starting out for a dent puller, buy yourself one of these. This is the ancient version of dent puller. It requires you to drill an 1/8 inch hole in the metal and you screw this screw in. And then you just pull back on the handle while sliding the hammer. So basic slide hammer. The next thing you're going to need is another power tool. This time we're going to get a 4.5 inch angle grinder. Get one with a cord. Don't spend the money on a cordless. The corded ones are actually better for a lot of uses, especially spinning a cutoff wheel because they turn higher RPMs. So get you one of these. You're going to want a wire wheel, a grinding stone, a flapper disc, one of these surface conditioning paint stripping discs. You can kind of see what they look like. These are great to have. They also wear out fairly quick, especially if you buy the cheap brands. But they're worth the money in the long run. And you're also going to need some cutoff wheels. One grinder will work for all of that. You just change them out when you need the different abrasives on it. So once you have your angle grinder with all of that, you're also going to need a hammer, like a hammer, and a chisel, maybe even a set of chisels, whatever. This is one area, if you can spend a little bit more money and get the made in USA chisels, they're usually a little better steel. The cheap chisels, I've actually broken the chisel when I'm trying to break a rusty nut or something, and that's kind of counterproductive. So get the best chisels you can afford, but have something. In my last video, I did some work with an air chisel. If you guys watched that, that could have been done with just a hammer and a chisel, but get what you can. The next thing on our list is a flashlight. Don't rely on your phone flashlight. Get one of these little work lights. They're magnetic, they're bendy, it has different modes, and they're only about $8 a piece. So you need some kind of flashlight. Short of a flashlight, you can get a work light that actually just plugs into the wall and you have your cord. Those can be handy because some of those also have outlets on the end. So if you're using your drill or your grinder or even electric sander, you can plug it into your work light instead of having to run a separate drop cord. So, something to keep in mind. Okay, the next item up is kind of a big ticket item, and there's really no good workaround. It's just, if you're working on old cars, you're going to need a welder. Now, you don't have to go out and spend $3,500 on a new multi-purpose MIG, TIG, stick, everything machine. You can get one of these little 110 volt wire feeds, pretty reasonable nowadays. I would spend the extra money for one that has the solenoids and takes gas, that's actually a MIG welder and not just a wire feed welder. The ones that do not use gas, they use a flux cord wire. They do not burn nearly as clean, and you'll get a lot more heat distortion in your sheet metal. So if you can afford getting an actual MIG, even the little 110 jobs are fine, and find your local welding supplier, get a tank of argon CO2 mix, and do it right. You can. But you do need a welder. Along with that, you're going to need a welding hood. You don't have to get a fancy electric welding hood. This Jackson hood here was my primary welding hood for probably 25 years or so, maybe 30. before I upgraded to an electric hood. And honestly, some days I still grab this one, but we'll get into the whys of all that in a future video. Maybe we're dealing with some welding stuff, but you will need a hood of some kind. Along with welding, you are going to need some clamps. At a very minimum, get yourself some of these little vice grip type C-clamps. Go to whatever your local China Mart is, get some cheap C-clamps. These are 3 inches. It's a real useful size. And get yourself a few of these little welding magnetic triangle square clamps, if you will. They're handy to have. Next thing up is a jack and some jack stands. It can be a simple bottle jack. It can be a floor jack if you want to spend the money on it. And if you're broke, use the jack out of whatever your daily driver is. Just don't forget to put it back in the car. But definitely get some jack stands. Because, again, kind of tying in with the protective equipment, jack stands are really important. You don't want your car to fall on you and kill you, because then someone else has to come behind and finish the car and you never get to drive it. So don't be that guy that leaves your car for someone else to finish. Use the jack stands. Save your own life. Next to the last category is something to measure with. Tape measure. You'll use that from time to time. If you watched my last video on replacing the frame head on the Volkswagen, you saw that I used some masking tape to measure with, sort of. I was cutting off a 2-inch strip of this frame head, and instead of measuring and laying it all out, I just put a piece of 2-inch wide masking tape down and cut right beside it. Not everything has to be high precision. Sometimes you just need a guideline, and you can do that with masking tape. You can also use masking tape if you're having to fabricate a patch panel, but that's for a future video. And there's other videos on YouTube out there that'll tell you how to make a patch panel template with masking tape. So look into that. Okay, the last category we have is for documentation. And it's not about documenting it for other people, it's documenting it for yourself. Don't rely on your memory. Trust me on that one. For some reason, that was a lesson that I learned the hard way about 17 times. Old cell phones, they're great. Take a million pictures. When you're tearing something apart, take pictures from every possible angle. And then you can just scroll back through, find your pictures, zoom in, everything you need to do. Take pictures. Along with that, keep a notepad and something to write with handy while you're working, and take lots of measurements, make yourself notes. A good example, like a lot of times on old cars, the front fenders are shimmed because the bodies weren't as precise as they are now. And so you may need to make yourself a note that, driver's side front fender had an 1/8 inch shim at the back and a 1/16 inch up front. Write that down. Don't wait until you're putting it back together and now you've got to try to figure out how to shim it all together. It was already done at one time. So take notes, make your life easier. And really, that's it. This right here is enough basic tools to get you started fixing up old cars. Don't be afraid to get started without all the special everything. Don't think you need a fancy shop with a lift. I've seen some really cool cars built in one-car garages. I've seen some built in driveways and backyards. So stop making excuses. Get out there and start making progress. Life is passing by pretty darn quick. So enjoy it. Make something cool. And thanks for watching. God bless. We'll see you next time.